Hello. In this video, I'm going to be going through a couple different ways that you can add vegetation in Blender for an architectural studio. This first method is going to be for grass, especially when you don't have much time. You just need a quick, nice looking grass. So for starters, you need a thin plane like this. You can't have it be a thick object like this. It has to be a thin topography surface with no actual thickness. So with this flat surface, we are going to select it and go down to particles on this bottom right area. And we're going to click it and we're going to add a particle system. Once we're here, you can see we have hair and emitter. We're going to turn on hair mode. As you can see, we have hair coming out of the ground. We are going to click and drag the hair length setting down to something that looks like a nice grass length. Once you've done that, we're going to enter a high number. I would recommend saving your file first, but try going up in large quantities because you need a lot for this to look thick and dense. I'm going to try 20,000. That looks pretty good. Once you've done that, we can turn on the advanced settings. And once we've turned that on, we can go and find physics. We're going to turn the brownie into something like 0.03. This adds some randomness to the grass and makes it look fluffier and denser. You can also notice that the color of the grass is being determined by the material underneath, which is very useful. From there, I'm going to go to the render preview viewport, and I'm going to move the light around just so we can see how dense our grass looks. It doesn't actually render the thickness of the blades of grass yet. That only happens when you actually hit the render button. Now I'll show you how you can scatter plants in Blender. When it comes to the actual models for plants that you'll be scattering, there's a couple different ways you can get them. Of course, you could create your own, but that's quite time consuming and not really the best idea in an architecture studio. So I recommend Polyhaven as a really great free resource. You can go to the models, nature, and you can find all sorts of plants and rocks and different things that you can scatter in your scene. It's only limited in the different types of trees that they have, but you can download a Blender file of the tree directly, so it's really easy getting it into Blender. Shaker trees is another great option. This is what most professionals that are using Blender are using for trees. These are super high quality, but they're paid. There are different tiers that have different amounts of trees. The $2 pack actually gives you a good couple amount of trees, so it's kind of helpful for some simple studio renders. But I think it's really worth investing in the half or full-sized pack if you like Blender. There's also Treeit, which is a $3 program, I believe, on Steam. You can create your own trees using this. It's a little bit more time consuming to learn how to use it, so I wouldn't recommend trying to learn it during a studio. But to start our setup, we are going to select the topography, and we are going to go to the modifiers tab and click add a modifier, and we're going to hit geometry nodes. Click new, and we can rename our geometry nodes. We're going to call this one tree 1. Once you've done that, we are going to go to the geometry nodes tab on the top ribbon. This is what it looks like. We're going to drag this bottom window up to make it larger. We'll make this one smaller. And I'm going to separate these nodes, and I'm going to let you know that I'm going to add all the nodes first, and I'll explain them after. So Shift A to add a node, and I'm going to search for distribute points on face. I'll also search for a instance on points. I'm also going to add a join geometry node. Put it right here, and I'm going to place it on top of this line so it snaps them. Then I'm going to search for a object info. Then I'll search for random value, and I'm going to Shift D to duplicate to make a second one. So this is actually all we need to set up our plant scattering. It's actually pretty straightforward. So to start, we're going to go to group input and take geometry, put it into mesh. Then we'll take points and put that into points, and then instances into geometry to combine them. Then on the second output, we're going to click this and drag it into density. We now have a density factor that we can change over here. And we'll scroll down here, and we're going to take geometry, and we're going to put this into instance. And we'll take value from our first random value, put this into rotation, then value from our second one into scale. Now we're going to set this first random value, we're going to set this to vector instead of float, and we're going to set the maximum factors. The first two are going to be 0.1, and the last one will be 360, because these are X, Y, and Z factors. These are going to be hooked up into the rotation. And then for this random value, we're going to set minimum to something like 0.9. This is literally all we need for our node setup for scattering plants. From there, we are going to go back to the layout tab, and then we're going to set the mode to weight paint mode. And from here, we're going to go to the data tab down here, and we're going to add a vertex group, and we're going to rename it tree1 vertex. Now that we have that done, we can go back to the modifier and we can hit this little cross symbol right here. This is going to allow us to type the name of the vertex group we just made, or we can select it. So now the density of our trees is being determined by the painting that we're doing in this weight paint mode. So I'm going to go to the modifier and turn off the preview, which is this little screen icon. And I would make sure to turn this off before you actually paint anything. But if I were to hide this and try painting on the surface, you'll see that it does this sort of color gradient, and the hot color is determining the density of where our trees are going to be. So if we go back to geometry nodes, there's actually a little thing I forgot. Set this random mode on distribute points to Poisson disk. And now we need to put the density back in. So we're going to take this density node and drag it into density factor. Now we can type to set the base density. I'm going to set distance min to 3 to start, and density max, I think I'm going to set this to 4. You can change these after, but these just determine how dense your trees are going to be where you've painted them. We still need to put our actual plants in though, so we're going to go back to object mode, and I'm going to go to file, and I'm going to append a blend file that I downloaded from Polyhaven. And you go to the object file, because this is how Polyhaven files work, and I'm going to select all the objects from the object folder. Once they've loaded in for you, I recommend turning your viewport shading to this solid mode with no textures. And I'm going to move all the trees below our project just so we're not seeing them in our actual final product, and also not while we're working on them. So we have 2 trees here and we only need 1, so I'm going to delete this one that looks a little bit strange. I'm not sure what the purpose of it is, but I'm going to get rid of it. So I'm going to use this one instead because this is the simplified model. And I'm not going to delete any of these because these are being hosted onto this big model right here. So if we delete them, it'll get rid of it. With that, we're going to go back to the geometry nodes tab. And we are going to select the ground again because I have the tree selected. And we're going to go in this viewport and find our tree. And I'm going to go down to object info and hit this little eyedropper. And I'm going to select the tree. Once you've selected the tree, we're going to go back to the layout tab on the top ribbon. And we can set our mode once we zoom up here to weight paint. And you can see over here we have our density set up properly, and we also have the visibility turned back on. I would try to keep the visibility off until you're ready to paint. But once you start painting, you'll see that we are now painting a tree. Now, the distance between these trees when we're painting them is being determined by the 2 values we put in the nodes for density. So I'm going to go back to geometry nodes and I'll show you where those are. So in this node, if I change the distance minimum to half of that and go back to layout, you'll notice the density between these trees is much tighter. There's more trees. I'll change this back to 3 and you'll see they get farther apart again. But I'm noticing that the rotation of these trees is not changing, so I'm going to go back to geometry nodes and go to our first random value. I forgot to plug in the rotation, and now you'll see that they're being rotated randomly. And that is essentially how you paint things in Blender. You could, of course, select a different object than a tree like we did. You could select a rock and paint rocks with different scales, or bushes, but this is how you do a tree. Now to add more plants, we are going to go to the modifier and we're going to click this drop down menu and hit duplicate. And from there, we're going to turn off the visibility of the original modifier. I think I'll also hide the second one actually. And once we've done that, we are going to go back to the geometry nodes tab and we're going to hit this button right here, which is copying the geometry setup. And we're going to name this one tree 2. Now you can see, as long as you follow these steps, our second modifier has a different geometry nodes than our last. So we're going to go back to weight paint mode, and we are going to now add a new group. Then we're going to call this one tree 2. Once you've done that, we can enter that into our second modifier down here. We're now referencing a new density group, kind of like how we did the textures in the last video. I'm going to go back to geometry nodes, and I'm going to get rid of our tree by hitting the X on this object info. Let's go back to layout, and we are going to append a new nature element. This could be another tree, a bush, or a rock, whatever you want it to be. I'm going to choose this tree right here, go to object, and I'm going to select everything. Just like last time, I'm going to pull it down below, and I'm going to get rid of the tree that I don't want. So we're going to use this other tree instead. Move it down even more. Now we are going to go back up here. We're going to select topography, go back to geometry nodes, find the object info. Remember, we're in the tree 2 group, and we are going to use this eyedropper to select our next tree. Let's go back to layout, weight paint mode, go up top again, and we're going to turn the visibility back on for our second group, and we're going to try painting. And there are our new trees. We can turn on our old ones, but just remember, the more that you see, the more intense it's going to be on your computer. But that is how you can layer different types of nature elements in one scene. And as I said, you can layer totally different types of things in here. So if we go back to Polyhaven, you could actually see they have plenty of models that you could mix together. There's different rocks you could use, different plants, smaller plants, bushes, wooden things, there's all sorts. I would say try a bunch, because nature scenes are all about layering different elements to make it look real. And of course, only scatter where you can actually see inside of your camera view. Here's an example of what your scene can look like when you layer a bunch of different nature elements on top of it. My computer's getting a little slow because it's not the most powerful, but you can see that we have a bunch of different types of plants in here, some different types of bushes, grasses, and some trees as well. And I just want to point out that this is really key to making your renders look more realistic. Now I'm going to show you how you can add a sky into your Blender file, whether it's for lighting or just for looks. I'm going to go to the render preview mode, go to the camera, and in this world button right here, you can actually select this color yellow dot, and there's two options here. The first one I want to show you is sky texture. This is a really simple way to do it, and it adds lighting to your scene. I think it looks really great. This also unlocks a bunch of settings that you can use, such as the elevation or rotation. And you can combine this with data from a website like SunCalc, where you can actually input your site's address into the search bar, and it will give you all sorts of information about it. And you can have the slider up here where you can find the certain elevation or rotation at a certain time of the day. And you can enter this directly into Blender for a super accurate lighting rendering, or even for a study. This could be super useful, especially if you have a design that has reflective surfaces. Blender, you can have really great reflective surfaces, and you can create wonderful renders to showcase your design. You could go to the Render tab, which is this little camera icon right here, and you could scroll down to Color Management, find Color Management, and you can change the exposure. You could make it something negative if you want to make the scene less bright, or you could turn it up to be something brighter. You can also hit look, and there's different contrast settings you can try just for little previews. Of course, you could do your post-process editing in Photoshop, but this is just a little tip. We'll go back to the World tab, and we're going to hit Sky Texture and remove it. And we're going to click on this button again and do Environment Texture. Now this takes HDRI type files, so I'm going to open and find one of my HDRIs. Of course, you can find HDRIs on Polyhaven. They have a large selection of them. That's where I get mine from. And as you can see, it's giving us a sky background, and it's partially lighting the scene. I'm going to set the render style to cycles instead of Eevee in the render settings. And it's quite laggy, so make sure to set your computer before you change it to this viewport mode. It also takes a second to render it. I recommend when using this to turn on this denoise button right here. This will make it less pixelated and make it look more of like a painting. It's a little easier on the eyes as you wait for it, just to see what it looks like. The only thing I don't like about HDRIs is that the shadows are predetermined. You can change this, but it's definitely outside of the scope of this video series. Now I've removed the HDRI, and another way that you could do a sun is by simply adding a light and using a sun. And when doing lights in Blender, I typically recommend adding a light probe, a volume, and sizing this up to cover your entire scene. I just think that it helps the light look a little bit better in the end. I'll scale it down so it's not too tall either. And I'm going to select the sun, and I am going to rotate it just a little bit. And it doesn't really matter where the sun physically is because the light is just coming from above in general. I just put it up here so I can see the rotation easily. We'll go back to our camera view, and I'm going to hit the render preview viewport and set it to Eevee just so I can make sure the shadows are where I want them to be. This actually works with HDRIs, but I'm going to go and remove my HDRI real quick. And you can see we have our sun right here and it's lighting up our scene. You could totally Photoshop the sky into the background if you wanted to. I'm going to turn the exposure up because it's a little bit too dark. But of course you could go to data when you have the sun selected and you can change the color of the sun. I recommend something warm like a pinkish yellow color. And you could of course also change the strength of your light right here. Of course you could change things like this post-processing with Photoshop though if you'd like to. But I'm going to go ahead and delete this sun. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to the world tab and I'm going to add a sky texture back in because I think that the sky texture is the simplest and fastest way to get good results, and this is what I recommend for an architectural studio. I also really quickly just wanted to show you what a render looks like with just a sky texture, no materials. It just really showcases how great Blender's lighting system is. Following this video is going to be a walkthrough of the interior of this building where I showcase the workflow for creating furniture super quickly. So check that out if you're interested.